Hello, hello, and thank you for joining us today. As usual, I'm Thibault from Price Labs and Rental Scale Up, giving you a minute to settle in. Excited to have you today. We're going to be talking about how to adapt to regulations. And of course, it's so you'll see we have three great speakers here. I got slides, like four slides, four, that's it. And then we get like a real discussion with real viewpoints, which that's what you want to get today. As usual, you will get the chance to ask your questions. You can ask questions during I was about to say the show. You can do that. And what else did I want to say? Yes, so just to paint a picture, I'm just making sure you guys can see me on the big screen, but just to paint a picture here. So just imagine, right? What if in your market you were told, you know what, 6 months from now, we're going to ban short-term rentals. And that's not crazy, right? We've heard markets or even countries where this threat has been over our heads. Of course, a lot of us are active in our local associations and trying to make sense of that and helping out. But what if it would actually happen to you? What would you do? Um, would you stick out and fight? You try to switch things up somehow, or maybe look to expand somewhere completely new? That's what we're going to be talking about. So let me start again sharing the four slides to get some structure. Before I do that, there's already 50 of you. Thank you so much. So we know where you are. I can really make sure we're relevant. Can you just in the chat let us know, yeah, where you're based and how many properties you have? Again, it's just give us a rough idea of where you are. And I see Miguel in Johannesburg, in Joburg, South Africa. Good to see you. So again, in the chat, let us know where you're based and how many properties you have. So it's really, and you can cater to this. Milan, 500 units. Uh, Dana from Responsibly. Hey, good to see you. Brighton, Rachel with 55 properties. Sarasota, 52 properties with Julie. Danius with 25 properties. Michaela with London, 1,200 properties. Look at that. Jennifer, California, one property. Madrid for Ben, 200. Okay, so we've got a lot of people, 200, 200, 72. Okay, so that gives us an idea, from Alaska and Kissimmee, of course, big market. All right, let's get started now. We have a good idea who's here. And this is the moment where I try to share my screen. If you ever attended one of these events, you know how bad I am with sharing my screen with these things. All right, let's do it. So I'll promise 4 slides. There we go. All right. So the angles we're going to have today is that sometimes there's regulations. People think, oh, what's my way out? Maybe a way out could be, I'm going to enter a new market, or I'm going to shift to midterm rentals. And that's just two examples, right? That's really what we want to do today. So I'm Thibault, I'm your host. I'm the founder of Rental Scale Up and the head of product marketing at Price Labs. Price Labs, of course, you may know it. We are a revenue management and dynamic pricing solution. And we price, I think it's not the data, I think we price every day more than 480,000 listings in the world. That's pretty cool. But I'm just the host. Oh yeah, sorry, I'm supposed to plug this. Sorry about that. And this, what you today, the show basically is being recorded. Obviously, you're gonna get it. We're gonna send it to you by email, but it's also available in the Rev Labs podcast, the podcast by Price Labs, as well as the podcast by Rental Scale Up. So it's a joint collaboration. But of course, Rental Scale Up will also have like a YouTube videos. We also have a weekly newsletter, so feel free to subscribe. Okay, that was my plug. All right. We have three speakers, Alexander from Guest Resty and Rental Ready, Aidan from Blue Gems Group, and Kyle from Price Labs. I'm just going to let them introduce themselves. It's very short and easy. And let me stop sharing now. And my question for the three of you, maybe, could you just maybe introduce yourself, your business, and paint a picture of like regulations and yourself, or what have you faced? How is it in your market? So people can have an idea. Alex, do you want to get started?
Sure. And first of all, thank you for having me here, Thibault. It's a great pleasure to be here, and hope and I hope it's going to be an interesting conversation. Actually, I know it's going to be an interesting conversation. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Guest Ready and Rental Ready. I started Guest Ready about 9 years ago now. I didn't think that I would be doing this for 9 years when I started, but here I am, and it's still fun. And yeah, we built Guest Ready over the last 9 years into the probably leading property manager in Europe and the Middle East with 3,500 units in 7 different countries. And to scale up Guest Ready, we built a comprehensive all-in-one property management software called Rental Ready. And with Rental Ready, we're now supporting other property managers, actually dozens of other property managers with thousands of units to scale their business and to have a simpler operation, more automated, and also to make more money. So that's what we're doing. And in terms of regulations, well, I've seen a fair share, obviously, over the last couple of years across different cities, across different countries. And I think we'll have a very interesting debate about this today, because really it's not even a country by country thing. It's very much a city by city topic. So yeah, that's so far about my intro.
And as well, let's dive right into it, Alex. What have you seen in the markets? You guys obviously are across different markets. Just when we say regulations, what kind of things have you faced in your markets?
Well, it's typically from, ranging from introducing rental caps. So that's also not something that is new, but in London or Paris, you have rental caps of 90 days in London, Paris 120 days. In London, they apply to any rentals that are not C1 licensed, so any rentals that don't have a hotel license. In Paris, it's only for your primary residence, and then you can rent for 120 days, but secondary homes you can't rent for 120 days. Then there are other regulations that you need to keep in mind about the length of the stay. So what constitutes a short-term rental? In many markets, it's anything less than 30 days. In London, for example, it's anything less than 90 days. And then there's also specific short-term rental licensing requirements. For example, in Portugal or Spain or Dubai, you can get short-term rental licenses. And in London, for example, there isn't a specific short-term rental license that would work in London, but you'd need to get a hotel license to be fully available to do short-term rentals the year round. So there's a whole lot of different ways to cut and shape and cut and shape the regulations. But that's a rough overview of what I've seen so far.
Thanks a lot for this broad view. And again, you are such a big actor in Europe and the Middle East, so it's you can see that's the imagination of regulators has no limit. Let's go to the US. Aiden, can you again same introduce a bit your business and let us know what you've seen in the markets?
Yeah, first off, thanks so much for having me. Happy Thursday to everyone. Good morning or good evening, depending on what time zone you're in. My name is Aiden Grohl, co-founder, CFO of Blue Gems Management. I was crazy enough to get into this industry back in 2020, so right around COVID. In 2023, I quit my corporate accounting job to go full-time with Blue Gems, or in 2023. We manage right around 140 properties. I think our portfolio is a little bit unique because we manage studios all the way up to 10, 11, 12 bedrooms. So, and pretty much everything in between. And then from a regulation standpoint, I think what's interesting is that we have a pretty diverse range from that perspective too. If you think about Disney, probably one of the most mature markets in the world, also the most saturated, most actual inventory count in terms of vacation rental homes pretty much anywhere in the world. And so that market is very stable and been very attractive for us as we've been here for now 4 years and beyond. But we're in other markets like Miami and Tampa where we've basically seen the opposite to be true, where we've struggled with challenging neighbors and changing regulations, increased taxes. So I think we've kind of been able to be on both sides of the coin, markets that have been very, very favorable and those that have been very, very challenging.
Thanks for that. And indeed, Disney is such a great market. Um, Um, Kyle, how about you? I mean, Kyle, obviously you're from Price Labs, but you've had a life before Price
Yes.
Labs, and at Price Labs you also see a lot of different cases. So I'm just curious again, introduce yourself a bit, and also let us know what you've
Oh,
seen in the markets. And there was just a poll that we put out, and like 41% of people attending say that they are in the markets where things are tightening up, regulations are getting even stricter. So that just again, thanks everybody for answering the poll. So what's your view, Kyle, on this?
absolutely. Yeah. So I'm Kyle. I'm a solutions consultant with Price Labs. Been with the company for about 2 years now. And as Thibaut's kind of hinting at, prior to that, I worked as a revenue manager. And I worked for a company that was kind of in a bunch of different markets across the US. Um, One other thing about my position that I'm currently in, I get to work pretty much on a biweekly basis with Aiden because I work with really large customers. So I'm down in Orlando right now working with customers. I've worked with customers in Vancouver and New York, in the Smoky Mountains where I'm from. I'm from Knoxville, Tennessee, where regulations are not anywhere close to the same. But in my previous life as a revenue manager, I was pricing in Summit County, Colorado, where we had a lot of restrictions coming in right as I moved over here to Price Labs. We see all types of little ones coming in all these random markets, and the Smokies in particular. We're not having, huge regulations on your permits or anything, but we're having safety regulations. So anybody that's seen it recently, you have to make sure that any fire pit or anything like that is at least, I want to say 15 to 20 feet away from your property. What happens if you have gas lines already built out in your property and they're only 10 feet away? So there's all types of little different nuances with the regulations that are coming in. One other thing I want to mention in March, coming up, I want to say it's March 24th, I'll be a part of an event in Missouri that is going to the state capitol to kind of go and talk regulations. So if you are in the Missouri area, I would definitely suggest checking out movha.org and participating with that as well. Thank you.
That's pretty impressive. Wow. And thanks for doing that for us for the industry. And again, we just heard we heard about Paris, London, Orlando, and fire pits and caps. It's so as you can see, well, it's wide array of things hitting us, but at the same time, hopefully now you get that we have three speakers who uh, have been facing these things and know a bit. So let's go into the first topic. So as we said, what we're trying to do for this session is to think, okay, if there's an actual short-term rental ban, what could I do? And I was thinking of two solutions, and one could be, for example, to change pivots. So before I do anything, how do I think through this, right? So imagine I got these big changes, and how do I even begin to think about it, to decide whether I should stay put, enter a new market, or pivot to midterm rentals? How to think through it. And Aidan, you want to get started?
Yeah, I think it would be interesting to kind of rank the different options that you have, right? So we talked about whether to stay, whether to pivot or enter a new market. I think we prefer to stay first. I think for number one reason, it's just very simple. We're already there. We already have the team. The question just becomes, how strict the regulations are. Are they even reasonable? So we've had cities that have cracked down on, 30-day minimums, but if you're going all the way up to maybe 180 nights or a 6-month minimum, that almost becomes a long-term rental strategy. And so I think regulations in general are not necessarily a bad thing. I think it just depends upon how complicated they are. I think in some cases we've actually used them to our advantage. So I kind of think about it from a supply standpoint. If it's really challenging to enter the market, that creates a very unique opportunity because if demand is increasing and supply is flat, obviously prices are going to go up and Kyle and I love that. So I think there's been an opportunity from regulations as well. But really, and I don't want to get too political here. I think it comes down to, is the local government on your team or are they working against you? And I think if they're against you, that's probably a market that I would look to pivot from. And then in terms of entering new markets, we've had our fair share of doing that. And I'll just say it's very complicated and we try to avoid it at all costs. So prefer to stay depending upon the complexity. Then I think we would consider pivoting. And our last option would be, entering a new market entirely.
Yeah, I like what you said. I think it's, if I may chime in, right, with as an owner myself, it's not just political, right? Some places, for example, I happen to, I come from a part of my life on a Caribbean island, and these Caribbean islands, we know that 70% of people traveling there will stay in a vacation rental. It's not a hotel island; it's a vacation rental island. So we've been lucky in that sense that we know that this 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 area depends from local government knows from tourism, and they know they depend from vacation rentals. So they're not going to ban it. They can regulate or something, right? But and in a way, we've been lucky that we started living in this area before all this, right? So sometimes it's just pure luck. Some conditions make it so that it's more favorable market. Favorable market, I would say. That's a very good, interesting viewpoint. Um, Alex, how about you? I guess with the different, from a guest ready, rental ready, you've seen different viewpoints. And how do you, again, as I said, how do you even think about, okay, there's a ban happening. How do I think about what to do?
I think Aidan summarized it pretty well. You got to lay out all your different options and then sort of prioritize them in terms of how easy are they and what are the benefits and disadvantages of each of them. Of course, the first option that you probably want to evaluate is like, what does it take for you to be compliant in the existing market and to continue operating there? Because by default, that's the easiest. But then if the regulation is so cumbersome that this is almost becoming impossible, then it's maybe when you need to think about other options. And yeah, in some markets, I think, Amsterdam, for example, we're not in Amsterdam, but I think Amsterdam or New York have been notoriously difficult. And I don't know if there are any very large scale operators there now, apart from hotel operators, right? But I think there in Amsterdam, it was like you can only rent for, I don't know, 14 days a year. Then you probably know that this is not a viable business. But if you can rent maybe 120 days or 180 days, or if you can get your units licensed somehow, then that might still be a viable option. And then the next alternative is probably stay in your market, but have slightly adjacent business models. So, maybe start managing midterm rentals. Then the question is, okay, how adapt of a market is your market for midterm rentals? I think some markets lend themselves very well to short-term rentals, typical vacation markets, but they're not that great for midterm rentals. But in other markets, for example, London, Paris, New York, or even Amsterdam, I think in those markets you could have a reasonable midterm rental business because you have business travelers, people relocating, people looking for a place to stay for a couple of months all the time. So you can build probably a viable midterm rental business. But if you're Kyle, you mentioned Smoky Mountains. I'm not sure if there is a big market for such midterm rentals there, right? So
Not at all.
probably not, right? Apart from maybe some digital nomads, but then do they pick that location? Is it really that interesting? But yeah, in London and Paris all the time, Dubai as well. I'm sure in Los Angeles or San Francisco, it would be the same. So that is probably then the next best alternative. And the hardest is probably to go to a completely new market. It's not impossible, but essentially you're starting pretty much from scratch because your brand is not known. You don't know that local market, and nobody there knows you. So yeah, those would be my priorities.
If I may,
go ahead, Thibaut. Sorry.
It's all right. It's all right. I'm just using that because there's a question from Andrew Thompson about EMEA, so Europe and Middle East, and I guess Alex, you're the expert here, and they just ask. Andrew's asking whether you're seeing hosts actually getting out in certain markets because of regulations. I saw in some markets. Have you seen this? We're actually leaving.
EMEA is it's a huge and very diverse market. So I think it depends. It depends on the market. In Dubai, for example, we still see the market growing. The market isn't very restricted. They're also building a ton of new buildings there. So the market overall is just expanding. And yeah, the long-term rents have recently increased because a lot of people moving to Dubai. but it's not like the same extent as maybe in Europe, where we just don't build enough new houses and there's a notorious shortage of houses, so there's more pressure on the local housing market. And yeah, I think in England, for example, they introduced new short-term rental or holiday-let regulations recently that were more around taxes, and tax benefits that were previously there were now abolished, so make it less attractive. And we've seen an impact on that. It's less in London, less in the urban areas, but more in the traditional holiday-let areas. So I think it's really a location by location question rather than something that is more broad.
Okay, thanks a lot. Kyle, you were about to say, what's your view on this?
I think I can kind of go off what Alex is saying too. There's so many different nuances when it comes to what we're looking at with regulations, and we've got a poll up right now, and the way this poll was answered to me, it kind of says like the way that we should all be thinking about, if regulations are coming in. So you want to look at everything as the main point, but then as we narrow it down, you want to focus on being compliant in the market. That to me is the first thing that you want to do, unless unless it's full lobbying power, like speaking from the US, like in New York City or in Los Angeles, where you have hotel lobbyists that are, they're going to make the decisions and everything. Then you might want to start getting into where you're transitioning and starting to look at maybe doing midterm rentals. If you do decide that you want to start doing midterm rentals or hop in new markets, there's so much information out there for you. And I am here as a part of Price Labs. Price Labs market dashboards, you can find that kind of information, but you've got so many other resources as well. I'm a big fan of Key Data. I'm a big fan of AirDNA as well. AirDNA published something a few months ago that was like, hey, these are the top 25 markets that you could potentially move into in the United States. Now, maybe you zig instead of zagging or whatever it is. You don't go exactly with what they're saying, but they're giving you some really good pointers of places to look at. By having that list, now you can go and check on Key Data. Now you can come in and check in on Price Labs and start really trying to figure out if these markets or that midterm strategy is good for you. Alex has a ton of knowledge when it comes to the EU and the Middle East. I've got a ton of knowledge when it comes to the US. And just like you mentioned with the Smoky Mountains, you don't want to move into the Smoky Mountains and try to midterm approach. You don't want to necessarily hop in there if you don't know what's going on. If you don't know what's going to work in the market, it can really set you up for failure. So being diligent with the information that you're trying to get is super, super important. And there are tons of resources out there, not just Price Labs either. Price Labs is a great one, but there are plenty of resources out there for you. So.
And speaking of resources, I really want to mention again that this Dana Lubner from Rent Responsibly is in the room here. And Kyle, you just mentioned the poll we had, which is like, are you staying put? Are you going to midterm rentals? Are you going to another market? And most people said, I'm considering all the above. And Dana gave another option, which is, let me read what was written here. So the solution is also by securing a seat at the table and mobilizing our short-term rental association to be part of the conversations shaping these regulations. Don't quit or leave the market. Get involved. Use your voice. There's power in a united front. And yeah, maybe it's something I think we've seen in some countries like Portugal. The people have been, the association on the national level have been amazing. I mean, they're always super active and they've been fighting big regulations. So it's there's really some really cases across the world where short-term rental associations make a difference and get organized. And sometimes, as you said, at PriceLab, we are lucky to be involved and share some data however we can help associations. So it's really, really good point.
Real quick on that, Thibaut, that was kind of where I came from with mentioning the lobbyists in New York and Los Angeles. I saw that comment come in as Aiden was talking, and to me, obviously getting together and having these alliances and making sure that you're on the same page with other property managers in your area is super important. If you're in New York City, if you're in Paris, France, the lobbyists kind of have that already taken care of. So it's going to be hard for you to kind of do anything with regulations. But if you're in somewhere like Jefferson City, Missouri, or you're down in Orlando, a few months ago, it's probably been 6 months now, Aiden and JB with Blue Gems had just a little get together where it was everybody in the area coming in, having dinner together, chit-chatting. Those people are now on the same page. Not that they're doing anything with regulations, but if something comes in that's going to impact their business negatively, now they have a bunch of people that are all thinking together and thinking alike and working towards the same goal. So I think advocacy is super, super important. And the less involved that your government is involved in the less involved the local government is, the better chance you have at making a really successful alliance and being able to, so to speak, have that seat at the table, in my opinion.
All right. So let's go for it. So let's imagine that you decide that expanding to a new short-term rental market is the way to go, right? It's one of the options we had. So what are the absolute critical factors you need to assess before taking that leap? For example, what does that due diligence look like? And again, Aidan, you want to get started on this one?
Yeah, I think a few things come to mind for us. The first is the history of the regulation. So I talked about Disney early on. The regulations have been here for 50 years, so helps me sleep at night knowing that there's been, very little change over that time period. So that's a huge factor. I think what a lot of people probably don't talk about is unknown regulations. So like if there is actually no history, that's very risky because we don't actually know what'll happen next week or next month or next year. So I think that's probably the most risky, having unknown regulations or literally zero history. The next thing that we look at is the local government, and we know we keep bringing up politics, even though I said that I wasn't going to, but I think it's very important from a tax perspective. So we look at actually the local tax revenue that the governments are collecting, and we think about it from the percentage of their total revenue. So if I look at a market like Orlando or really Florida in general, the local economy depends so much on tourism. So it'd be pretty unlikely that they're going to shut down vacation rentals in general if they're relying on that revenue stream. And so we think about it from a local economy perspective as well. And then the last thing, which Kyle brought up already, I think, is the concentration of hotels versus vacation rentals. I would be a little bit scared to enter a market where hotels have a lot of power from a lobbyist perspective, or they have a lot of control over the local government because their pockets are a little bit deeper than ours. So I think as much as we want to fight for advocacy, I think I would be a little bit skeptical to enter a market. So going back to the Disney example, we kind of hit all three of those, right? We have a history of regulations. They've been established for many decades. We have a strong reliance on the tax revenue from the local government. And then there's a very good mix of large vacation rental communities as well as hotels. So that market is probably the safest from a regulatory standpoint because it's hitting on all three of those points.
That's great insights, really well structured. Thanks a lot. Alex, how about you? Entering a new market, you are in several markets. I just wonder, what would your advice be here?
Yeah. I think I can't really add anything to regulation anymore because Aidan summarized it super well. And especially like that you also put the point of how much does the government collect on tax and also versus hotels, because I mean, we have people from Paris here, for example. In Paris, the hotel lobby is super strong. The government probably collects a lot of money from those hotels. So it's a bit difficult for short-term rentals. I guess the same might be the case in New York. But other factors that we're looking at that we find super relevant are the market size overall. I think it's always easier to start in a big market. We also look at competition. Even if in a big market you have lots of competition, we found that markets with a lot of competition are still more attractive than if you don't have much competition, because there's probably a reason for it. If there's nobody there, then you think you found a gold gem. Probably not the case. Probably it's just very hard to operate there. It's also important to check market growth. I think Price Labs or AirDNA or so on, they have data on this. What we also found really important is profitability. So how does your ADR, how does your length of stay look like, occupancy, how much you make per booking versus then the costs of servicing the booking. We found that, for example, Dubai is an interesting market because you have relatively high ADRs, relatively good length of stay, so good average booking value, but then you have relatively low costs of servicing for cleaning and turnover and so on. So that's something I would look at. And then seasonality as well. It's pretty difficult, from our opinion, to work in a market that is very seasonal. So we prefer non-seasonal markets. Then also, I think what is interesting to look at is how does the market fit to your current setup? This is mostly important if you're considering to expand even into a new country, right? But what is the language there? What is the time zone? What is the current currency, cultural differences? I think it's always easier to, of course, expand in your existing market into a new location there. In the US, for example, there are plenty of locations that you can go into, but if you're in a small country, maybe you're even considering entering a new country, and then those are factors that you should consider too.
And Alex, you said setup and made me think. Obviously, you guys at Rental Ready also are PMS. So I'm just wondering, let's imagine I go from managing one market to two markets, right? What does that change in my tools, for example? How should I think through this as well?
Yeah, very, very good point. You got to have a PMS that supports you on that multi-location journey. If you're just in one location, probably everybody in your team has access to all the information there. But if you're going to a new market, you probably want a PMS that allows you to have multiple different rules for each location, for different templates, for different automations, messages, and so on. You also want different rules for permissions, what people can see. The people from the new market probably shouldn't see all the data from your core market that you've been in before. So you want to be able to assign different roles, and you probably have an overall general manager that oversees everything. Maybe that's you, and they have permission to say everything. So these are important considerations. And then obviously, if you're in multi-currency, multi-language markets, then that is something that your PMS also has to be able to handle. And that's been something that for Rental Ready was an absolute must from the get-go, because we've always been supporting different locations.
Thanks. That's very practical. Love it. Thanks a lot. Kyle, how about you? On this question, like, oh, I've decided to enter a new short-term rental market, how to go about it?
Yeah, so I think I kind of hit on it a little bit earlier, talking about, like there are things out there that say, hey, these are opportunities for you. There's plenty of people that, Aiden may get on LinkedIn one day and be like, hey, Orlando's an opportunity, look for that. And, kind of follow along with what people are suggesting too. But once you've identified your market, go in and start looking at what's happened with supply recently. Another aspect that, and this is, I don't know why operational keeps coming in my head. I've thought that a lot during this podcast as we've talked. If you're getting in a new market, understand how it's going to impact you operationally. So like if you're down in Orlando right now and you have all the cleaners that you could potentially want, but if you move into a more rural market, it's going to be really hard to find cleaners. It's going to be hard to meet length of stay trends and all of that stuff. There's so many different little nuances and pieces that touch each other. So I would say get in there and first start with supply. The second most important metric to me would be average bookings per listing in the market. So if you look at that over the course of the next 30 days or the next 90 days, getting a firm understanding of how many bookings you could kind of expect. The other thing with me being a data geek, I want to get in and slice and dice the data a little bit more. So once I see supply, then I want to get in and really segment it even further and start looking more at the stuff that you want to pull off. So if if you're going to have certain amenities that you're going after, or if you're going to be going after certain, like I said, length of stays or pet friendly type stuff, look and see how that's going to impact you. And if you're going to be able to meet that bottom line that you're looking for. Kind of goes back to what Alex was saying about making sure that you're going to be able to cover all your bases with your operational costs.
And Carlos, we have many Price Labs customers,
Indeed.
watching listing this. So when you say, "Oh, I want to know about number of listings or pet friendly or not," which tools in Price Lab should I look into? First question. Second one, a bit the same question as for Alex. Once I've decided to enter another market, how do I again set this up into Price Labs so that I can make it run efficiently?
Yeah. So real quick, Melanie put a really good comment in there about if you are getting into a new market, find a local person, like somebody that you can trust, or maybe another property manager that you trust. I think that's great advice. So thank you for putting that in there. Um, in Price Labs, if you want a really broad, quick view, you can go to our main page, which is hello.pricelabs.co. And we have what's called the World STR Index. So where you can go in and look at a full view of how large markets are performing. Now, you're not going to get the nitty gritty of it. Like, you're not going to be able to see the difference between Kissimmee and Orlando, but you will see the overall view of Orlando. So that can help you get, that directional, like I was speaking with, just like you could get from looking at AirDNA's hot 2025 properties or whatever. And then once you get that in your mind, use market dashboards. There's so much information in there for you. You can find every detail of everything, what amenities work. I personally like to hop in there and build a comp set out that takes all of the lesser properties out of the picture. So I don't want to know, I don't want to know what you're doing if you're a 4.1 star rating, or if you've got like 10 property or 10 reviews. I want the people that are established, see how they're performing. And I really want to be able to go in there and see, can I replicate their success, or how can I beat their success? And by going in there and drilling in on market dashboards, you can get some crazy good insights.
Cool. And in terms of dynamic pricing, should I just then set up another group, or how do I segment this in a tool for this to work?
Yeah, and I assume what you're talking about is if we go in there and we build out these comp sets and we get some really, really great information. And that's one of the great things about Price Labs. Once you build out these comp sets, you can take them and apply them inside of the dynamic pricing tool. So instead of, since most of you all are Price Labs customers, I think when you go look at your listing and you've got neighborhood data, you click on neighborhood data, you're being compared to what I would call is a little bit of a broad stroke. Now, Price Labs is hyper local, so we are looking and trying to get you as close as possible. But we don't necessarily at this time look at certain things like, hey, is this person 4.9 star or above? Hey, does this person have a hot tub? Hey, does this person allow pets? Once you build a comp set out that really matches that, then you can see what you can really achieve with it. And then you get to compare apples to apples. The number one, and I mentioned this before earlier, when you are looking at getting into a market, make sure that the occupancy trends are looking good. If you're seeing peak season is way behind, that's probably a trend. Yeah, booking windows could be slower, but that is probably an indicative trend of that overall market. So keep that in mind. Pay attention to how occupancy is looking, pay attention to your supply. And then again, that one metric I mentioned before, the average listings per booking in market. Again, you go into market dashboards and Price Labs, it has the total number of listings, it has the total number of bookings over a period of time. If you want to do the math, you can divide it and get that number right there, or you can scroll down at market dashboards and that'll be presented for you in a graph as well.
Thanks. So hopefully that gives everybody a kind of view on how to consider entering a new short-term rental market, whether there's regulations or not, the history, the occupancy, a lot of data, the setups in your PMS, is even possible. So that's really, really good questions. Now let's imagine my plan B or N at the same time. I don't know. You're gonna tell me whether I can do both at the same time. I have no clue. Entering the midterm rental market. So let's imagine, right? Should I just go about it? You know what? I've done short-term rentals. I can surely do midterm rentals. Or is it a completely different business model in terms of pricing operations? Um, Maybe Alex, get started. How should I, if I want to say, you know what, short-term rentals are banned, I'm going to go midterm rentals, and I'm just going to tell the owners, now we go midterm rentals. That sounds pretty easy. What do you think?
Yeah, I think it depends on the market and if the market lends itself to this sort of strategy. as said, in a market like London or Paris, you get demand for these kind of stays, and you actually get them on platforms like Airbnb, or even Booking.com is now moving more into the midterm rental stay. I think 30 days they do now. So you can operate in a very similar fashion, but then the next step would be to list on more midterm rental focused platforms, or even on long-term rental platforms. And there the strategy becomes very difficult. It's much less, is very different, becomes much less automated, much more involved. You have to think about doing viewings for people, or at least doing video viewings, or having videos available for your properties. So it depends a bit on the market, on the strategy, and yeah, I think in some markets it works well, and you can just adapt relatively easily. But in other markets where there isn't enough demand, this becomes a pretty big stretch, and then it's an uphill battle, really. So I'm not sure if then the next step would rather be just to do long-term rentals, but then we're again further away from our core business, and there are many agents that already do this. So I think if the market is good, it's a good alternative. If the market is not good, then I would just stay away from it.
Now, how do you guys do it? Do you have like, I don't know, in London and Paris, do you have like both short-term, mid-term rental, and you mix and match? And when there's a gap in your mid-term rental bookings, you go short-term
Yeah.
rentals. How do I think through this?
This is very much regulation driven. So in a market like London, for example, or Dubai, you can do a mix and match. You can do a hybrid model where you can do short term. You typically do that over the high season to get your short term rentals at the highest ADRs possible, get the highest booking for your limited amount of days. And then during the downturn, during the low season, you try to get longer stays. That's slightly lower average daily rates, but then you get long stays. So that works pretty well. It doesn't work in markets where you can't run such a hybrid strategy. So, for example, in Paris, we have a dedicated midterm portfolio. We have a dedicated midterm portfolio where we only do midterm rentals, and the same in Barcelona. And there the strategy is then different. Even if it's high season, you run midterm rentals, and yeah, it's slightly different. In terms of pricing, and I think maybe Kyle, you can say something about this too, but in terms of pricing, the way how I think about pricing is that you're getting longer stays, let's say like 3 months, and then over the 3 months you have 100% occupancy. Obviously, then you might have gaps afterwards, but during this time you have 100% occupancy. So you should be giving a discount versus the nightly rate that you would expect on a short-term rental, because on a short-term rental basis, typically in low season especially, you don't aim for 80-90% occupancy. Maybe you're at 70 or even lower. So you should be willing to give a sizable discount in that midterm rental rate, also taking into account that it's much less operational work. You only have to do one check-in, for example, for 1 month or for 2 months. We actually found the economics of this model pretty attractive when you get it working, because you have much less operational tasks going on.
Just one quick question. Heliana is asking like platforms for midterm rentals. You mentioned a few platforms. You have like 2 or 3 in mind. People could, I guess, obviously, whether you're in the US, in Europe, not the same ones, but in Europe, for example, which one, or in Dubai, which one are you guys using? Channels?
It's in Europe, I would say there are a few, but the question is always how much do they really bring? Like one good platform was Homelike. Unfortunately, I think they're now in financial difficulties from what I've heard. But they used to be a very nice platform that got corporate bookings. In Paris, for example, there's Morning Croissant, there's Housing Anywhere in Europe as well. In the UK, you have platforms like C2. Every one of these platforms is again a bit different. In Dubai, there are platforms like Property Finder and Bayut that are more like a Zillow or a Rightmove in the UK, but they're actually catering much better to midterm stays. What we find from some classified websites, they only cater to long-term stays of like 1 year plus, and then that's very difficult to operate with such a platform. But if your market has a platform that is a bit more tailored towards midterm stays, then it's actually good to list on these platforms.
Thanks. Yeah, indeed. Aidan, on your side, what's your view on this? How would you enter midterm rental market? Maybe what's been your experience with it?
Well, first, do everything that Alex said, and then second, I think I have a couple things to add. I think maybe unpopular opinion here. We haven't been the biggest fan of midterm rentals, only just because I feel like it's an entirely different business model. So I think if we phrase the question differently and we said, would you ever pivot to a long-term rental? Like everyone would kind of agree that that's entirely different. I think midterm rentals, the assumption is that they're similar. I think in our experience, we've had to use different marketing platforms, different distribution, different pricing strategy. I know Kyle will get into some of the more tactical things that you can do, but we have a very high occupancy strategy, and we found that the gaps between those longer term bookings, 30, 60, 90 days, have really hurt our annual revenue numbers. And so I just think that when you're talking about trying to leverage the same resources, meaning your cleaners, your team, your employees, your vendors, it's really a different process entirely. And I think our challenge has been, are we taking away from our short-term rental model by trying to do midterm rentals? Because it's really challenging to be good at both. I think if I could pick, I would rather go all in on one of them, because I would be scared that I become average at both if I'm trying to have too many different strategies. Now, of course, to Alex's point, there's some markets where naturally it'll work, and I think a hybrid strategy is great. I think we've had problems where hybrid is not an option, right? So 30-day minimum. If you do have that vacancy gap, sometimes there's really not much that you can do, and that's really hurt our annual numbers. So I think in general, we found the marketing and the way that we get bookings to be very different. Having to leverage insurance agencies, construction contracts, corporate housing, just a little bit more difficult than, your typical VRBO, Airbnb, Booking.com, big three, push out the marketing and the bookings are rolling in. We found that to be a little bit different in that sense. So I think my fear in general would be that if we focus too much on midterm rentals, we're taking away from what we do best, which is short-term vacation rental focused.
I like this. Also, I like that you have a diverging opinion, right? It's exactly what people need to hear, because
actually, I don't think. I mean, I actually agree with Aidan, right? I mean, if you have, like, Aidan is in a great market for short-term rentals. If you can continue to grow in that market, I think it's true. Just stay focused and become the best at what you're doing, because it's much easier to continue doing what you're doing and become even better at it and grow your portfolio like this than to do something new, go to a new market or go into a new business model. But I think sometimes you're just forced, right? You're not dealt the most favorable hand, and then you just have to react. And this can be a way to react to such a unfavorable regulatory change, for example. But if you have a large market, then just double down on what you're doing already. It's always easier. And I think also as an entrepreneur, not just in short-term rentals, there are always so many opportunities that you can say yes to. But in the end, I think it's about knowing what you really want to do and becoming super good at it, and then scaling this. And I think this is something that most successful companies do really well. They just focus and scale in what they're doing.
Very interesting viewpoint. Thanks for reacting. Kyle, how about you? Midterm rentals, what do you think?
I think midterm rental and kind of echoing what Alex and Aiden have been saying, I think midterm rentals are such a different business model than what you have with short-term rentals. I think there's a lot more hunting that you have to do to get your calendar filled. Whereas when you're short-term rental, it's more of the consumer hunting for you. I feel like there's a lot more that you have to try to pull. And it goes with what Aiden's saying, like you got to reach out to insurance adjusters and build those relationships. And one of the, I don't know if we hit any of the midterm websites in the US. One of them that's really popular is Corporate Rentals USA, by Vivian. Yep, that's super popular one. We can give some more examples later on, but that to me is the biggest issue, that you've got to sit there and constantly hunt. From a pricing perspective, your rates are going to be a lot more flat as compared to short-term rentals. Like you're not gonna have all the ebbs and flows and the high spikes and the low lows. It's going to be a little bit flatter, but you're also going to have to manage your calendar so much better with a midterm rental so that you can maximize your revenue. Like let's say ideally you're going after 28 to 30-day stays. Obviously, we would love to have somebody come January 1st, January 31st, check out. February 1st, February 28th, check out. That's not always going to happen, though. We're not, we can't lock people in that way. You could technically, but that's probably not going to help you maximize your revenue and ultimately, be the best at what you can be. So you end up with lots of random, gaps in your calendar. Some of them you can fill depending on the regulations in your market. You may not be able to fill them. If you have a strict 20-night minimum in your market and you've got a 15-night gap, guess what? 15 nights are gone, or you got to do something illegal. So it becomes so hard to manage your calendar in that sense. Now, let's say you do go midterm and you do want to go in there and change your strategy. And again, I don't want this to come off as like, hey, salesy Price Labs. This is Price Labs podcast, so I want to help you guys understand how to do it. There are factors that we can turn down. So, like our demand factor, we wouldn't necessarily want that to be set up for short-term rental. Price Labs does have settings and suggestions as well, specifically for midterm rentals. So, if you do want to test this and see if it's something that you can do, you can literally go to your minimum stay settings, flip from short term to midterm, and see what Price Labs suggests based on that market. And it's not just cookie cutter across the board. Those midterm suggestions are going to be different based off what we pick up in that market as well. Going on that piece of filling your calendar, one other functionality of Price Labs that's super beneficial when it comes to midterm bookings. It's beneficial with short terms too, but I think it helps a lot more midterms. And that is the adjacent day pricing factor that we have. So most of the people in Price Labs understand what I mean when I say orphan gap. That means you've got a booking here, gaps here, and then a booking. Well, the adjacent day factor works if you only have one of those. So if you have a booking here and then an opening here, and then there's nothing on the other side, you can influence these days that are right here next to this booking with an adjacent factor. So if you think about it, going in there and let's say somebody comes in and they book going back to my previous example, they book January 1st through January 30th. Somebody comes in, books February 1st through February 28th. Then somebody comes in and says, I want March 20th through April 20th. You don't have a restriction saying you can't go below a certain number. Now you can use that adjacent day factor to go on that backside and try to protect yourself from getting that gap again. Feel like I'm over explaining this to an extent, but there are tools there for you. So if you do decide to go to midterm, always reach out to our team over at support@pricelabs.co and get some input on how to use that functionality.
I think this has been super helpful, Kyle, and fully agree that the right pricing strategy is so important for midterm rentals, and actually also discussing this with the owners, giving them a bit of a heads up that things are different. The expectations have to be different when it's midterm versus short term. And since Kyle gave a little bit of intro on what's needed on the pricing tech side, I think there are also other tech capabilities that your PMS, such as Rental Ready, should have. One is, of course, we talked about distribution channels, so being integrated with these distribution channels. Then the option to have monthly payments when you get a booking on Airbnb, that's kind of done for you already because Airbnb does that for you. But on other channels, or if you get direct bookings, which you will get when you do midterm rentals, your PMS has to handle that. Also, down payments for the first month, for example, contract automation, because you will actually sign contracts for these midterm rentals, inspections, mid-stay cleanings. It's something that maybe you don't do if you have a 4-night stay, but if somebody's staying for a whole month, maybe they want weekly cleanings or so. And it's just good to be able to offer this through the PMS than in a manual way. So just wanted to add that as well.
Agreed. And I'm really glad that you mentioned that contract aspect of it too, because once you start getting into those midterm rentals and have some of the longer ones, as a property manager, you're going to want to have some type of contract with them, and making sure your PMS has that capabilities spot on. On that note, real quick, Thibaut, we did have a question from David, and he asked which PMS we prefer. If you don't mind, I'm going to step in on this one and say we've got Mr. Alex here with Rental Ready, so we're obviously going to suggest Rental Ready.
Yeah, that's what I was about to say. I was about to say
obviously going to suggest it, but my answer is always the same. If somebody asks me this, send an email to support at whatever that PMS is and see how long it takes to respond. You want to have a PMS that has your back, that innovates, that also has a good support team, so that you know you can get an answer if something is in there. So that would be how I would answer that one.
I don't know. That's such an easy and fast way to kick the tires. That's pretty good. All right. We have like 4 minutes, so just maybe before I let you I explain to people how to connect with each of you. What's maybe the one last piece of advice, like maybe like one thing's not to do, what a pitfall when thinking about all this. We talk about all things to do. One thing, something not to do, maybe one pitfall in when thinking about it, kind of strategy that you've seen or to do it. Aidan, what would come to your mind?
Yeah, I think maybe understanding the different layers of regulations. I know in the US there's quite a few, and I think a lot of people, they may understand, at a state level there's really not too many to keep track of. Thankfully, you get into county regulations in the US, then you get into municipality or your local town. And then a lot of people forget about the HOA. And I've heard horror stories around this topic where people buy a property and the HOA just has really total control over your asset and thus your business. And I think that becomes very dangerous, very risky. There might be an equivalent regulation in Europe, which I'm sure Alex will talk about. And I think the problem there is there's really no oversight or really process and how these rules get voted in. You have a board of maybe directors, and they decide one day that short-term rental should become illegal. So I think we've been very fortunate to have very good HOAs in the Disney market, but I would be very, very careful of whether it is an HOA, a building, any regulatory authority that just has too much power with a very loosely defined process on how those regulations can change. I would be very mindful when buying a property that fits that criteria.
Cool. And just to sake of time, Aidan, if people want to know more about you and contact you, what's the best way to reach out?
Yep, you can reach out at LinkedIn, just my first and last name, Aidan Groll, AIDANGROLL.
Fantastic. Thanks a lot. Alex, how about you?
I would say specifically it's about how to avoid pitfalls when expanding or pivoting, right? And I think sometimes when something unexpected happens, like a new regulatory change is about to be launched, or another threat is looming there over your business. It's tough as an entrepreneur, as somebody that leads a business. It's a small business, but maybe you have employees, or it's just your family depends on it, other families depend on it. And maybe at that moment it's a bit hard to keep a calm head, but I would just say take your time, don't rush into something, because if you pivot the business or if you enter a new market, that's going to be a big step. And just rushing into it, I mean, Aidan said it, you really don't want to do that. You want to understand the regulations in depth of a new market, but you also really want to understand other things of that new market. And if you're pivoting into another business model, then really do your research, really understand all the complexities of that, and then give it a try. But make a plan. And I think what just doesn't really work very much is like dipping your toes a bit and just seeing if it works, because there are other businesses that do it professionally, and competing with them, if you're just dipping your toe into a new market or into a new business model, it's probably not going to work out. So don't lose your head, stay calm, and make a good plan. That's my advice. And you can find me also on LinkedIn, or you can reach me on my first name dot last name at rentalready.com, or also on GuestReady. Thank you.
Thanks, Alex. And Kyle.
I'll wrap it up real quick. What I would say is your competitors in your market are your competitors for homeowners. They're not your competitors when it comes to the big picture in your market. So as long as you don't have a terrible relationship with somebody that stole a bunch of homeowners or whatever, if you're in a smaller market that doesn't have a ton of regulations, get together with people, try to go grab some dinner and start planning ahead, and try to get something in mind for if those meetings and regulations come in, you all have a team that can go and start, kind of working together. So appreciate you all very much for joining us. You can find me on LinkedIn as well. I just deleted all the rest of my social media because all the crazy stuff that's been showing on there, so it's gone. But LinkedIn, Kyle Driscoll, with a couple of up, down, and up, down arrows. So appreciate y'all very much.
So no more TikTok videos of you dancing, Kyle. I'm very sad for that.
Never had a TikTok.
All right. Want to take a moment to thank all of you, Aidan, Kyle, Alex, for being here today. Really appreciate it. And there's very good words. Thank you for the nice words in the comments about the quality of this panel. I think we covered very good basis. And you get the recording. We'll turn this into a takeaway article, so you have time to think through this. I want to mention quickly as well Snigdine Yuvika, who also organized it, as well as Sorab. Again, that's you probably going to be listening, watching this all through RevLabs podcast and the Rentals Club podcast. Once again, thank you so much. Subscribe to the podcast, listen to us, you'll find us. And on Monday, Yuvika tells me you'll be getting the email with all the information and the links we mentioned. All right. Thank you so much, everyone. Take care of yourselves, your family, your loved ones, and see you soon. Cheers.
Thank you all.
Thanks so much.
Bye-bye.